Greetings and welcome to our Daniel class. We are, I think, in the final section of Daniel. We've been going through several weeks. Last time we did chapter 9, and this time we'll do chapters 10, 11, and 12. Daniel is a key and pivotal, important book in the New Testament. In the Old Testament, it looks at many of the New Testament events that are coming, and he comes at a pivotal time in Israel's history, and he's given a very clear and important vision of what's going on. The book of Daniel has a wide range. Begins in chapter 1 with the first group of exiles, 605, 606, 607, somewhere in there. The first exiles, the youths, are taken to Babylon, and they refuse to eat from the king's table. They say, "Give us seeds and water," and so there's some kind of new planting that seems to be in view there. Chapter 2 is big. Nebuchadnezzar has his dream. Begins the nations section, and there's a whole issue here of Israel and the nations. And Daniel defines, like no one else, the bridge time between Israel and the church. Israel as a nation, as a kingdom, is over once Babylon comes and conquers them. After the exile, they do come back to the land, but they're not an independent kingdom anymore. They don't have a king. There's never another king of Israel. And so they are always under some kind of empire. And so Daniel defines the 4 world empires that God sets up to as kind of caretaker empires over Israel during the time between Israel's kingdom and Israel's king, when Jesus comes. And when Jesus comes and announces the kingdom of heaven, the kingdom of God is here now at hand, then Israel is, it's the last page of Israel's history, and Israel is completely over in AD 70. So you get these 4 empires: the lion, the bear, the leopard, and the other, the gold, the silver, the brass, the iron. These four empires are what God has defined to watch over Israel, and each of these empires is schooled then. Nebuchadnezzar, as the first of the emperors, has to be taught that they can't. He has to respect the worship of Israel. He has to respect the God of Israel. Nebuchadnezzar has to meet the unknown God, the God Most High, the one that he doesn't know. Otherwise, he devolves into a beast. So the empires there's a warning, and there's a place where they have to sit and be schooled, even though they are also over and have a responsibility to watch and guard Israel. So then chapter 5, the end of Babylon, God who watches and weighs. Nebuchadnezzar's grandson, Belshazzar, is found wanting, and the Persians come in. Darius the Mede, or Cyrus the Persian. Daniel is by this time an old man, and he is favored by the king, but his enemies put him in the lion's den, and the king brings him back out, overturning the immutable law, almost. Whose law is immutable? Who gets to say? Then chapter 7, we take another look at the 4 empires, the 4 beast empires. Chapter 8 hones in on Greece, the goat with a prominent horn, Alexander the Great, comes and takes over from Medo-Persia, the ram with 2 horns. And then chapter 9, we looked at last time, the 70 weeks, and all the different ways to count that and what those things mean, and how the empire time. Everybody's recognizes that there is a time between, and it's a prophetic time that takes us from the time of Israel as a nation, independent, to the time of the coming of the kingdom of God and Jesus. And the empire time is a bridge time. So you look at all these charts, and they are all bridges between that and this. Now, we're coming to chapters 10, 11, and 12. This is the final vision, and we'll get into the kings of the north and the south. the kings of the north, the Seleucid Empire, the Seleucid Empire, and the king of the south, the Ptolemaic Empire, the Egyptian Empire. So here we are. We've gone through from 605 in chapter 1. The first 4 chapters happen pretty quickly, within a long 10 years, down through Nebuchadnezzar's time. But then there's a gap. Nebuchadnezzar dies, and it's Belshazzar and the handwriting on the wall and the lion's den and the lion, bear, leopard, and the 4th beast, and then the 2 beasts, the ram and the little horn beast, and chapter 8, chapter 9, the 70 weeks, the 70 years. Now 10, 11, and 12 all happen at one. It's one vision. It's kind of one chunk. So we're going to try to cover all those together. And we're all the way down to 535 BC. This is the last chapters also are in the last years of Daniel's life and his ministry. We can review. You can look again at the timeline from for the 4 empires. There was Babylon, then you get the Medo-Persians, then you get the Greeks, then you get the Romans, and the transitions between those. We are dealing in these chapters now with the intertestamental period. Look at the stuff between 200 and 100. Antiochus IV, the Seleucid, the Syria piece. He ruled the Jews from 175 to 164, and there were some big events and some terrible things that happened there. Antiochus banned the Jewish and Samaritan religious practices. If you possessed a Torah, that was a capital offense. And so many of the prophecies from Daniel's day, 200 years before this, 300 years before this, detail this pretty carefully. But then Rome, also then we're going to get all the way down through Rome between 100 and 0. There's no year 0 from the year 100 BC on. The Roman Empire is dominant, and Rome conquers Jerusalem, and Julius Caesar becomes the first virtual emperor. And Augustus becomes emperor in 27 BC. Herod the Great is active during those decades. So we'll look at some of that, and those things do come up in these prophecies of Daniel. Daniel's prophecy, again, it covers the 4 shepherding overseer empires. These empires that are responsible for hosting, for guarding, for caring for, sponsoring, whatever, Israel in the time between Israel's kingdom and the kingdom of God, the kingdom of heaven that comes with Christ. Now, we also then talk about, there's a topic about, then later on we'll get to Daniel will be saying, these things pertain to the time of the end. Okay, when's the end? What are we talking about the end? We can talk about the end in several different places in Scripture. You have the end of the Adamic world. The land is flooded with Noah. Then you have the patriarchal time. Well, the patriarchal time doesn't last forever. The land is starved. Abraham, the patriarchs go to Egypt, and then we don't have patriarchs anymore. You turn the page, and it's a nation. You have Israel. And it becomes a sanctuary world. Now there's a tabernacle, and then there's a temple. So with Israel as the priestly people, they are the sanctuary people, and then that world is organized in a different way. But then that world is invaded. There's an exile. There's the end of the kingdom part of the sanctuary people. Although the sanctuary people continue even in the empire time, from Babylon to Rome. But the end of the end, so there's an end of the flood, there's an end of the slavery, there's an end of the subjection, there's the end of the exile. What end are we talking about? When we have a prophecy that says these things pertain to the time of the end, we don't just immediately think, oh, the end of the world, the second coming of Christ. Not necessarily, because there are some significant world-changing hinges in history. Adamic world is over. The patriarchal world goes only so long. The sanctuary world lasts only until, and then the empire world, and then we don't care about the empires anymore. after the church comes, after Jesus comes and he's ascended, and especially after 70 A.D. when Israel is finally over. You don't need um, caretaker empires anymore, because you don't have a sanctuary people within the empire that need to be cared for or taken or preserved. So we have the end of the, and then we deal with abominations that are associated with the end of each of these times. There's an abomination before the flood. Man's imagination was only on evil continually. There was an abomination at the end of the patriarchal time. The brothers betray and sell their brother. There was an abomination, especially then when you come to the tabernacle, because the abomination and the desolation means God is going to not dwell in the midst of his people anymore. There's the holy place and the sanctuary and the nation arranged around the sanctuary, and God says there are abominations that will happen, that I will desolate, I will leave empty the sanctuary. So the wicked sons of Eli, the tabernacle is broken, the ark is removed, so there's no ark inside the tabernacle from the time of Eli until the time of Solomon. The tabernacle is empty until the temple is built and things are put back together. But then the temple is destroyed at the end of the temple era in 586, at least when the Babylonians come. Ezekiel sees the glory removed. The abomination that causes desolation is the wicked priesthood in that case. And then the abomination that causes desolation would probably be also the wicked priesthood and the slaughter of the Christians before the temple is destroyed in 70 AD. So different kinds of ends that happen. So just a word, just let's think about that and be sensitive to the necessity for understanding which end are we talking about? What's the end that's in mind here? Okay, Daniel 10, let's read. In the 3rd year of Cyrus, king of Persia, a word was revealed to Daniel, who was named Belteshazzar. And the word was true, and it was a great conflict, and he understood the word and had understanding of the vision. In those days, I, Daniel, was mourning for 3 weeks. I ate no delicacies, no meat or wine entered my mouth, nor did I anoint myself at all for full 3 weeks. On the 24th day of the first month, and let's just pause right there. This is Daniel's last vision. Let's look at some things here. And this is the latest date that he gives us, the 3rd year of Cyrus. Cyrus conquers. His first year is 539, so Cyrus's 3rd year would be 535 or 536. It's been 70 years then since Daniel's captivity in 605, 606, whenever that was. And then the group 1 of exiles have already gone back to Jerusalem. The 3rd year of Cyrus, in the 1st year of Cyrus, he says everybody can go back. Ezra 1. First year of Cyrus, king of Persia, the word of the Lord came. And then verse 2 there, thus says Cyrus, king of Persia, whoever among you of all his people, may God be with him, let him go up to Jerusalem. So good news, everybody gets to go back. Daniel doesn't. Many people stay in Babylon, but there is a group that returns to rebuild. And so isn't that good? Why is Daniel then mourning and eating no delicacies, nothing? Daniel's mourning and fasting may have been prompted by news of trouble in Jerusalem. When the exiles go back, you read in the book of Ezra, people of the land were discouraged. The people of Judah made them afraid to build. They bribed counselors against them to frustrate their purpose all the days of Cyrus, king of Persia, even till the reign of Darius, king of Persia. Also meaning the Darius, king of Persia. So Cyrus and Darius being the double name for the same guy. Cyrus, Darius the Mede, Cyrus the Persian, the same guys. Anyway, so Daniel's mourning and fasting may have been prompted by that kind of news. In those days, I, Daniel, was mourning for 3 weeks. It was the 3rd year of Cyrus, and got news from home that things are bad. So Daniel's fast then goes on for 3 weeks until the 24th of the first month. Now, what's that mean? Daniel began his fast 3 weeks earlier on the 3rd day of the first month, and Daniel continued his fast right through the 14th of the first month. And what's that mean? Well, the 14th of the first month is Passover. right through the 7 days of Passover, all the way through to the 14th. So on to the 24th. So Daniel's fast, in a way, it should be alarming. It's kind of a fingernails on the blackboard sensitivity for Jews who are reading this. First month, and you're fasting during Passover. If anyone, Numbers 9 says, if anyone who is clean and is not on a journey fails to keep Passover, that person shall be cut off from his people, because he didn't bring the Lord's offering at his appointed time. That man shall bear his sin. So it's a severe thing. And so there is, for Daniel to note that this is the first month, and I was fasting for 3 weeks, and it went right through Passover and the Feast of Unleavened Bread. That's an important thing. So it just heightens the sense of Daniel's despair. We're not clear exactly how Passover was, if it was studiously observed during the exile or whatever. So I don't know if this was an unusual thing, if everybody always kept the Passover during the exile. Maybe not, but but for Daniel to call attention to that fact at this point is significant. All right, so let's keep going. Verse 4, on the 24th day of the first month, I was standing on the bank of the great river, that's the Tigris. I lifted up my eyes and looked, and behold, a man clothed in linen, a belt of fine gold from Uphaz around his waist. His body was like beryl, his face like the appearance of lightning, his eyes like flaming torches, his arms and legs like the gleam of burnished bronze, and the sound of his words like the sound of a multitude. And I, Daniel, alone saw the vision, for the men who were with me did not see the vision. But a great trembling fell upon them, and they fled to hide themselves. So I was left alone, and I saw this great vision, and no strength was left in me. My radiant appearance was fearfully changed. I retained no strength. Okay, so basically, I had this vision. And but it's striking here that this time through, it struck me how this is much like Saul's experience on the road to Damascus. He sees this thing, the men who are with him don't. He is overwhelmed. Next time you read about Saul on the road to Damascus, remember Daniel on the bank of the Tigris. Heaven speaks, and there's a great weight to this message. There were men with him, and they didn't see the vision, but a great trembling fell upon them. They fled to hide themselves. When heaven speaks, people fall down, people hide. Okay, so continue in Daniel 10, verse 9. I heard the sound of his words. As I heard the sound of his words, I fell on my face, a deep sleep with my face to the ground. And behold, a hand touched me and set me trembling on my hands and knees. And he said to me, O Daniel, man greatly loved, understand the words that I speak to you, and stand upright. For now I have been sent to you. And when he had spoken this word to me, I stood up trembling. And then he said to me, Fear not, Daniel, for from the first day that you set your heart to understand and humbled yourself before your God, your words have been heard, and I have come because of your words. The prince of the kingdom of Persia withstood me 21 days. But Michael, one of the chief princes, came to help me, for I was left there with the kings of Persia, and came to make you understand what's to happen to your people in the latter days, for the vision is for days yet to come. All right, so we begin to get this vision. Here we have, first let's note that Daniel falls down in a deep sleep and then later stands up trembling. A deep sleep like this recalls the Garden of Eden, where Adam goes into a deep sleep and then Eve is created. It's almost, it's like being mostly dead. It's like a little death. And Daniel goes through something like a little death and resurrection here. The weight of this new thing that's happening is so great. There is a death and resurrection in the prophet, and you can kind of expect a death and resurrection in Israel. Israel, you go back, you think they're going to build, you think everything is going to look great, and it's good news and whatever. Well, we've got enemies, and guess what? You're going to be in empire time, and you're just going to get kicked around for the next few centuries. Okay, it's a little bit of death and resurrection feeling to the whole thing. It's interesting that the man who speaks to Daniel says, "I've come because of your words. The prince of the kingdom of Persia withstood me 21 days." What's that about? Well, Persia, at this point, Persia is the current world empire. So why would Cyrus, who's called Messiah in Isaiah, Cyrus is the anointed one. Uh, he's going to come and decree that Israel can go back to the land, and they're released from their captivity, and the exile is over. Cyrus, the prince of the Persian Empire, why would the prince of the kingdom of Persia withstand the messenger from God to Daniel for 21 days? Why is the prince of Messiah of Cyrus's empire opposing Gabriel or whoever this angel happens to be? And it just raises all kinds of questions about what goes on. A lot of people make quite a theology about what's going on in the heavenlies and the what kind of struggles and warfare might be going on. Do God's angels really have to fight their way through enemy resistance? Some say, well, maybe in those days, but maybe that part's over because since Jesus' conquest and his victory, things in the heavenlies have changed. And so maybe this kind of stuff that happened in Daniel's day is not what we should think about or expect or imagine happens today. I don't know. It's not clear. We don't get much, and so we should be shy of building a whole big theology about angelic warfare involved in when our prayers aren't answered, uh, or when the answer to our prayers seems delayed somehow. Let's be shy about speculating about what might be causing that or what might be involved. Um, and so far, I think that's I think that Gabriel or whoever this angel is has to deal with the human ruler of Persia, which was Cambyses. Cambyses was the co-regent with Cyrus, and Cyrus, as sympathetic as he was with Israel, Cambyses was not. He was hostile to the Jews, and when Cyrus was off doing other things, Cambyses was left in charge, and so it may have been a human Uh, barrier somehow. Although you have to wonder how does a human frustrate the designs and the purposes of an angel? So who knows? It could be a spiritual warfare kind of thing going on. And then I also so far I think that Gabriel, this angel, if it's Gabriel, also has to deal with enemy angels, because I was left there with the kings of Persia, and I came to make you understand what was going to happen in the latter day. Michael, one of the chief princes, came to help me. So there seemed to be some heavenly struggling going on here, which is, it's not insignificant. The enemy tries to frustrate the purpose of God. That's what Herod, as he was killing all the babies. The enemy's going to do everything he can to keep this from happening, to keep the good news from coming, to keep the purposes of God from being announced. So the enemy is involved in active opposition. So that's one of the things that goes on. You think of when the shepherds hear the good news from the angels, suddenly there's a heavenly host around them. Well, they're just there because they're the choir showing up, or are they there because they're the vanguard and they are protecting, and they've got some kind of directive? They're supposed to be the leading wedge of heaven's invasion, and to make the incarnation to clear the enemy activity around Bethlehem. Who knows? You think of Gehazi, the servant of the prophet, and the prophet comes out and says, "Let him see what he doesn't see." And Elijah's servant looks around him and he sees this entire army of angels around him. So who knows what kind of forces are active and what they're doing. Anyway, it looks like there's something like that going on, and it's tempting to speculate. And you just heard me do a lot of speculation there. It's probably maybe a little bit too much. Anyway, verse 15. When he had spoken me according to these words, I turned my face toward the ground. I was mute. Behold, one in the likeness of the children of man touched my lips. Then I opened my mouth and I spoke, and I said to him who stood before me, O my Lord, by reason of the vision, pains have come upon me. I retain no strength. How can my Lord's servant talk with my Lord? For now no strength remains in me, no breath is left in me. Again, one having the appearance of a man touched me and strengthened me. And he said, O man greatly loved, fear not, peace be with you. Be strong and of good courage. And as he spoke to me, I was strengthened. And I said, Let my Lord speak, for you have strengthened me. And then he said, Do you know why I've come to you? But now I will return to fight against the prince of Persia. And when I go out, behold, the prince of Greece will come. But I will tell you what's inscribed in the book of truth. There is none who contends by my side against these except Michael, your prince. So we get another view of the contest, another view of what's in store, and you get a double touch, one to lift him up at all so that he can even speak, and then another touch so that he can stand and hear and be strengthened. Oh man greatly loved, fear not, peace be with you. This is what heaven does when we are overcome and down. It's interesting that this is the second mention of Michael. Michael is the prince of the Jews. Perhaps he's a mediating angel on the level of the prince of Persia. Some also argue, and there's some. We'll talk about this again later at the end of chapter 12, where it appears that Michael, your prince, it sounds like it's even Jesus. Jesus may be the chief of the Jews, and this is the pre-incarnate Son somehow contending in the heavenlies. Who knows? Michael is mentioned only here in Daniel 10, and he's mentioned again in chapter 12, Daniel chapter 12. He's mentioned briefly in Jude chapter 1 and Revelation 12. So we do get Michael mentioned those 4 times, and then Gabriel, the other, he appears only in Luke's gospel besides this. So those are a couple of interesting things. And when he says, I'm going to go out, and when I go out, behold, the prince of Greece will come, but I'll tell you what's inscribed. Greece is still 200 years in the future. Greece? Who's Greece? At this point, Greece is not even a player. But Daniel has seen the goat with the prominent horn. He's which turns out to be Alexander the Great and Greece. So Greece has been in mind, but named as Greece. This may be the first time. I'm not quite sure whether or not Greece is named before this, even though we've seen what turns out to be Greece in the visions of the beasts in the statue. Okay, finally, Daniel 11. This is a long chapter. And as for me, in the first year of Darius the Mede, I stood up to confirm and strengthen him. And now I will show you the truth. Behold, 3 more kings shall arise in Persia, and a 4th shall be far richer than all of them. And when he's become strong through his riches, he shall stir up all against the kingdom of Greece. And then a mighty king shall arise, who shall rule with great dominion and do as he wills. And as soon as he is arisen, his kingdom shall be broken and divided toward the 4 winds of heaven, but not to his posterity, nor according to the authority with which he ruled. For his kingdom shall be plucked up and go to others besides these. So, so far so good. Hey, this prophecy stuff is easy. We're going to get some more kings in Persia, and then we're going to get Alexander the Great, and then Alexander the Great doesn't last long, and boom, 4 pieces of his empire. What could be simpler? I don't think anybody doesn't see this. I mean, all the interpreters understand what we're talking about here, and everybody sees, wow, this is easy. So how hard can it get? Hang on, because next, okay, so let's just review the map. There's Greece inside the red circle across from Turkey. And then we've got the king of the north and the king of the south. We're going to talk about the north and the south and the north and the south and the king of the south, the king of the north, this and that. for a long spell here. And when Alexander's empire splits apart, the two pieces that concern Israel are the king of the north and the king of the south, because you see Israel is between them. So Israel becomes this ping pong ball, this football, this possession that's passed back and forth, stolen from this guy, taken back from that guy. And so as the king of the south, the Egyptians, the Ptolemies, try to push up and control more, they're resisted by the king of the north, the Seleucids, and they try to possess more. And so as long as the four pieces of Alexander's empire remain, and before Rome rises, we talk the king of the north and the king of the south are in that between 200 and 100 BC is when most of this stuff is going to happen. And here we go. Look at the north and the south and the north and the south. Daniel chapter 11, verse 5. Then the king of the south shall be strong, but one of his princes shall be stronger than he, and he shall rule, and his authority shall be a great authority. After some years they'll make an alliance, and the daughter of the king of the south shall come to the king of the north to make an agreement. But she shall not retain the strength of her arm, and he and his arm shall not endure. But she shall be given up, and her attendants who fathered her, and he who supported her in those times. And from a branch from her roots one shall arise in his place. He shall come against the army and enter the fortress of the king of the north, and he shall deal with him, and he shall prevail. He shall also carry off to Egypt their gods with their metal images and their precious vessels of silver and gold. For some years he shall retain from attacking the king of the north. Then the latter shall come to the realm of the king of the south, but shall return to his own land, and his sons shall wage war and assemble a multitude of great forces, which shall keep coming and overflow and pass through, and again shall carry the war as far as his fortress. Then the king of the south, moved with rage, shall come out and fight against the king of the north, and he shall raise a great multitude, but it shall be given into his hand. And when the multitude is taken away, his heart shall be exalted, and he shall cast down tens of thousands, but he shall not prevail, for the king of the north shall again raise a multitude greater than the first, and after some years he shall come on with a great army and abundant supplies. Okay, I hope that's clear. This is the history of the Seleucids and the Ptolemies. And for a while, they get along with a marriage alliance, but then they fight back and forth. They shall, verse 6, they'll make an alliance. The daughter of the king of the south comes to the king of the north. And all this did happen. And if you want to look it up, you can match the names and the battles with the prophecy. And the good commentators go into detail and show how these things happen. So for us, this seems like a whole lot of detail. Why do I even care nowadays? But for Daniel, all of this is in the future. And for the people who've gone back to the land and are, they think, oh, there's reason for hope. We're back in Israel. Our things are going to get better. No, you're going to be a football. And there's going to be the king of the north coming through with his army. And then pretty soon you're going to see the guys going the other way with the army from the king of the south. And so you guys need to know that these things are decreed by heaven. Do not worry about the headlines. Do not worry about what you hear in the news. These things, God's not surprised. He's got them all under control. In fact, he told you about them ahead of time. So all this king of the north, king of the south stuff, in our day, we tend to think, why do I care? But in Daniel's day, Ezra, Haggai, Zechariah, they've recently gone back to Jerusalem. They're rebuilding with great hope, and this view of the future is not encouraging to them. Jerusalem will be little more than a political football for a long time. This vision of the future is given to sustain them through long and difficult and discouraging centuries. But God has it all planned. It's all under complete control. And I'm sorry, but this is kind of how it's going to work in empire time. You're still the sanctuary people, but you're not a kingdom. And so you're under these caretaker empires. And this is, unfortunately, you're going to have to suffer along with the way the world is organized during these years. So Daniel 11, we're going to continue here. Verse 14, in those times many shall rise against the king of the south and the violent among your own people. And then we get a little bit of Israel You get some of the we'll talk about the Maccabees, and we'll talk about some of the activists who are in Israel, and then they start to play a little bit, but it's still mostly north and south. The violent among your own people shall lift themselves up in order to fulfill the vision, but they shall fail. Then the king of the north comes to throw up siege work and take a well-fortified city. The forces of the south shall not stand, or even his best troops, for there shall be no strength to stand. But he who comes against them shall do as he wills, and none shall stand before him. And he'll stand in the glorious land with destruction in his hand. He'll set his face to come with the strength of his whole kingdom. He'll bring terms of an agreement, perform them. He shall give him the daughter of women to destroy the kingdom, but it shall not stand or be to his advantage. And afterward he shall turn his face to the coastlands and shall capture many of them. But a commander shall put to an end his insolence. Indeed, he shall turn his insolence back upon him, and then he shall turn his face back toward the fortresses of his own land, but he shall stumble and fall and shall not be found. So who are we talking about here? Uh, I think the best commentator, that the one that I'm following, says reportedly this is Antiochus the Great, 199 BC, and you can look at the history of his stuff and find and kind of draw the line between this and that, and between this event and that event, and you can kind of see how the things do match up in the history of Antiochus the Great. And when we think of Antiochus, we're usually thinking of Antiochus Epiphanes, who comes later. But Antiochus the Great, the first one that we deal with in this King of the North and the South stuff, is a different guy. Now, when he comes, in verse 16, when he comes to stand in the glorious land with destruction in his hand, it's a difficult translation there. The word for destruction is literally the completion, really just the word for everything. He will come with everything in his hand. So it could mean destruction. We're going to destroy everything. But it also can mean completion. It can mean everything is fulfilled, or everything belongs to him. So Antiochus, and so that's difficult. And some people jump off here and say the historical matching doesn't work because of that verse. But because Antiochus didn't destroy Jerusalem, he actually came and sponsored devout observances. He was about as benevolent a caretaker as you could hope for in those circumstances. So verse 16, the last part of verse 16, he shall stand in the glorious land with completion, with everything in his hand. He's got complete control, but it's not necessarily a wicked or persecuting or a time of particular difficulty. All right. So, and then he's going to give him the daughter of women to destroy the kingdom. Da, da, da. Antiochus gave Ptolemy, the southern king, his daughter, hoping to make a north-south alliance because Rome was starting to grow over there. But the Antiochus's daughter later then sides against daddy with the Egyptians, against the north. So that seems to be what he'll give him, the daughter of women, but it shall not stand or be to his advantage, and that stuff. So that's a historical detail that fits. And afterwards he'll turn his face to the coastlands and capture many of them. Antiochus moved against Greece, and he was hoping to link with Hannibal, who had gone around the other way and came down against Rome. And Antiochus tried to get into that fight, but then there was a Roman counterattack that defeated Antiochus, and Antiochus then becomes a Roman vassal. A commander shall put his end to his insolence, and he shall stumble and shall not be found. So this does match up with the history of Antiochus the Great, the first of that line, and then he'll fall and shall not be found. He was finally assassinated, trying to pillage a temple treasury in Syria. If you were a king and you conquered places, you go to the temple, which is where all the gold and silver are, and you take all that stuff out because you got to pay your army, and it's expensive to try to conquer places. and Antiochus was finally assassinated trying to pillage a temple in a temple treasury in Syria. So that's okay. So who's next? Then shall arise in his place one who shall send an exactor of tribute for the glory of the kingdom. But within a few days he'll be broken, neither in anger nor in battle. In his place shall arise a contemptible person to whom royal majesty has not been given. He shall come in without warning and obtain a kingdom with flatteries. Armies shall be utterly swept away before him and broken, even the prince of the covenant. And from the time of an alliance is made with him, he shall act deceitfully, and he shall become strong with a small people. Without warning, he shall come into the richest parts of the province, and he shall do whatever neither his fathers nor his fathers' fathers have done, scattering among them plunder, spoil, and goods. He shall devise plans against strongholds, but only for a time, and he shall stir up power in his heart against the kingdom of the south with a great army. So this is pretty clearly talking about Antiochus' successor, Seleucus the fourth, 187 to 175, and he tried removing various temple treasures, including Jerusalem's, to pay a tribute to Rome, and he was assassinated. So that's pretty much what verses down through verse 25 are talking about. Seleucus IV was succeeded by the infamous Antiochus IV Epiphanes, 175 to 163. Okay, now he's the one who begins to talk about in verse 21. Antiochus Epiphanes, and so the verses 21 through 25 seem to be talking about Antiochus Epiphanes. And he was not a legitimate successor. In his place shall arrive a contemptible person to whom royal majesty has not been given. He came to the throne without. He was not the legal heir of the kingdom. And when he talks about armies will be swept away before him, broken, even the prince of the covenant, here the prince of the covenant probably now refers to, I think, and I like the reading where they say this is the temple's high priest, or more likely the high priest's prince, the son of the high priest. And so armies will be swept away before him and broken, even the prince of the covenant. And from that time, an alliance is made with him. He shall act deceitfully. So Antiochus is playing sides here. Antiochus IV sold the high priesthood twice for much needed cash. If you wanted to be rich in society, in ancient societies, one of the best streams of income was the priesthood. Because people brought their sacrifices and made their gifts, and the place was filled with gold, and the temple treasury was the deal. And so, if it was available, and you could swing it, and you had some cash, whoever was in charge, you could say, "I'd like to be the priest around here now." And so Antiochus, you loot temples and you also sell priesthoods in order to raise money. And Antiochus IV sold the high priesthood twice for much needed cash, which also then lets you know kind of how things are in Israel, how things are in the Holy Land during this time. You've got the aristocrats and the people who were not pious. The leadership was corrupt, and you had people who were ready to buy the priesthood. This is not something that is good, and that the priesthood then gets bought and sold back and forth. And from the time of the Maccabees all the way down to the time of Christ, you don't have what really could be regarded, you can't argue that there had a legitimate high priesthood in any of those days. And without a legitimate high priest, how can you have a legitimate Day of Atonement? If there's no high priest, no legitimate high priest to go into the Holy of Holies and sprinkle blood on the altar, on the mercy seat. So how do you do that? We don't see that, and that could be the hijinks in the high priesthood have to do with the desolation, the abomination that causes desolation. Is linked to and grows out of the corruption of Israel's priesthood. Antiochus IV Epiphanes sometimes tried to ally with Egypt because he's watching Rome get stronger and stronger over there, and maybe Egypt is a good ally to have. Sometimes he tried to conquer Egypt, but the Egyptians, the Ptolemies, appealed to Rome for help, and Antiochus was told by Rome, keep out of Egypt or else. So Antiochus then does back out of Egypt, but then he spent lots of effort making Judea his personal fortress buffer state. So if I can't conquer Egypt, which would be then, I can control them, and that's going to make me safe. If they're going to still be there, then I need Judea between me and them, the halfway between the north and the south. I need them to be my strong buffer shield. So the king of the south is going to wage war with an exceeding great army, a mighty army. He'll not stand, for plots shall be devised against him. Even those who eat his food shall break with him. His army shall be swept away. Many fall down slain. And for two kings, their hearts shall be bent on doing evil. They speak lies at the same table. Their end is yet to be at the appointed time. They shall return to his land with great wealth. But his heart shall be set against the holy covenant. And he'll work his will and return to his old land. And at that time appointed, he shall return and come to the south. It will not be his this time as it was before. The sons of Kittim, the ships of Kittim shall come against him, and he shall be afraid and withdraw, and shall turn back and be enraged, take action against the holy covenant. And he'll turn back and pay attention to those who forsake the holy covenant, for from him shall appear and profane the temple and the fortress, and shall take away the regular burnt offering, and they'll set up the abomination that makes desolate. And he shall seduce with flattery those who violate the covenant. Okay, in 169 BC, Egypt tries to reconquer Palestine, but Antiochus overwhelms them, and then he's able even to invade Egypt. The next time Antiochus moved against Egypt, a Roman force based in Cyprus, Kittim, stopped him. At that time, he'll return. He'll come to the south. It won't be ships from Kittim shall come against him. He'll be afraid and withdraw. So this is describing the back and forth between Antiochus and the Ptolemies in Egypt, the Seleucids and the Egyptians. At this time, it mentions the ships of Kittim shall come against him, and the Romans get involved. Okay, unless you're an extreme futurist, and the guy who made this map says Kittim is actually the USA, the Kingdom of the North is Russia, it looks like, the Kingdom of the South is, down in Egypt or whatever, and there's the Euphrates River. So you can find, there are a lot of different explanations here. Obviously, I am following the guy who says we're tracking the empire time. We're tracking the struggle between North and South, Seleucid and Ptolemy, the back and forth, and Israel needs to know this because Israel has to go through it. And they are bumping along in the back of a truck in empire time. And where are we going? And how long until we get there? And it's an uncomfortable kind of a situation. In his retreat, Antiochus stopped in Jerusalem to strengthen his position there. Many pious Jews hated him, but many in the ruling class, Hellenizers, including his high priest clients, cooperated with his projects. He'll take action against the Holy Covenant. He's going to turn back and pay attention to those who forsake the Holy Covenant. Forces from him shall appear and profane the temple and fortress. They'll take away the regular burnt offering. They'll set up the abomination that makes desolate. And this is usually interpreted as being Antiochus profaning the temple in Jerusalem. I don't think that that's the only way to read it here. You can just note a little bit what he did and what did they do, they being the power party among the priesthood. Those who are in Jerusalem who are sympathetic and cooperating with Antiochus. He'll turn back and pay attention, but they will take away their regular burnt offering. They shall set up the abomination that makes desolate. He shall seduce with flattery those who violate the covenant. So there's a sense in which it doesn't sound like the language doesn't immediately support the idea that it's Antiochus who's taking away the regular burnt offering or setting up the abomination that makes desolate, that somehow they, and I'm taking that to be the power party among the priesthood, those who are sympathetic and cooperating with Antiochus for their own ends. When it says there in verse 31, forces from him shall appear and profane the temple and fortress, the word there is literally arms. And that could mean military arms, forces, military forces, or it could mean that word is also used for cooperating agents, those who are doing what he wants to do, his instruments. So it could be agents from him shall appear and profane the temple. And that means it doesn't have to be Antiochus's army. It could be Antiochus's sympathizers. And so that's where I'm getting this reading. That's why I'm sympathetic with the view that it's not Antiochus and his army, but it's the cooperating party and the people in Israel. And it says, and they shall set up the abomination that makes desolate. And that sounds like you're going to set up a pagan statue or something and put it in the holy place. And that's how many people read it. But it's they shall set up. That word is literally give, which is it's a utility word and has all kinds of uses and doesn't require the idea of setting up like an artifact or an idol or a thing. It could be they shall accomplish the abomination that makes desolate. So they'll do it. It's something that comes from them, but it doesn't have to be an artifact or a physical profaning kind of thing. So, okay, these verses are a lot of disagreement here, a lot of different ways to understand this. This is the way I see it, though. An abomination that makes desolate is always an offense that's committed by God's people before his face. The teachers I've been following, the books that I read, they're convinced that it can't be, the abomination that makes desolate cannot be an act of an outsider, somebody like Antiochus, any more than an unclean mouse who runs across the tabernacle courtyard is going to defile the courtyard. In God's eyes, Antiochus, he's not in covenant. Antiochus is not sworn to Torah. Antiochus isn't part of the covenant people. He's not under any obligation to keep Torah. So since Antiochus is not in the covenant of Torah with God, Antiochus has no standing with the sanctuary people. So he's like a mouse. And therefore, Antiochus cannot commit an abomination that's going to break the covenant or defile the sanctuary or cause God to leave. The abomination that makes desolate is something that God's people do, and God is offended and will withdraw. Okay? And it's what anything Antiochus does is not going to offend God and make him withdraw from the sanctuary. Antiochus doesn't count. He's ineligible. And I think that makes sense. I think that's, once you grant that, then we have to think about, okay, what is the abomination that makes desolate? The ones who can break the covenant, the ones who can make a desolating abomination, these are the temple servants, the ones who are sworn to Torah, the ones who are supposed to behave and follow God's law. And when they disregard, when they violate, when they otherwise treat their office and the function with contempt, then that is what ultimately counts as an abomination that will cause God to leave his house empty and desolate. So you get things like Eli's wicked sons in the tabernacle. The tabernacle is broken, the ark's taken away. You get the wicked priests before the exile, and the temple goes down and is destroyed by the Babylonians. Later, you get the enemies of Christ in the church leading up to 70 AD, and the very, very end of the old creation and the final destruction of God's desolate house. So when we're looking for what's the abomination that makes desolate, it's got to be something that's committed by God's people before God's face, and these people who should know better. So that's why I'm slow to follow those who see Antiochus as the guy who does this abomination of desolation. And of course, there are lots of differing views on that. And we all love Jesus, and we're sworn to Him. We're brothers in Christ by our baptism. So um, that's okay. We can disagree. All right, verse 33. The wise among the people shall make many understand, though for some days they shall stumble by sword and flame, by captivity and plunder. And when they stumble, they shall receive a little help. Many shall join themselves to them with flattery, and some of the wise shall stumble, so that they may be refined, purified, made white, until the time of the end, for it still awaits the appointed time. And the king shall do as he wills. Now, who's this king? He shall exalt himself and magnify himself above every god. He shall speak astonishing things against the God of gods. He'll prosper till the indignation is accomplished, for what's decreed shall be done. He'll pay no attention to the gods of his fathers or to the one beloved by women. He'll not pay attention to any other god, for he shall magnify himself above all. He'll honor the gods of fortresses instead of these, a God whom his fathers did not know. He shall honor with gold and silver, with precious stones and costly gifts. He'll deal with the strongest fortresses with the help of a foreign god. Those who acknowledge him he shall load with honor. He shall make them rulers over many and shall divide the land for a price. Well, this is the bad guy. Who is this king? Are we talking about Antiochus here? There are lots of suggestions here. The radical Protestants think this is the Pope. The futurists will all say we're still waiting for this guy. He hasn't appeared yet in history. Calvin says this is the succession of Roman emperors after Antiochus. Or, and guess what? I'm going to suggest that this is Herod the Great in the line of Herods. And you can look at each one of these bullet points and say, well, you can read that like this, and Herod did this, and that kind of matches that. And so it works as well as the Pope or the Roman emperors or somebody yet to come. So I think there's actually a pretty good case to be made here that from here we're kind of talking about Herod, who was exalting himself and magnifying him above every god. I mean, if you're talking about the whole line of Herods, then you get the Herod in the book of Acts, and everybody says, "This is the voice of a god. It's the voice of a god," and he's then eaten by worms. He'll speak astonishing things against the God of gods. You look at Herod's slaughter of the children. You look at Herod's trial against Jesus. You look at all the things that the Herods did. The Herod's temple. He's going to the fortresses that he built, the construction projects he did. He built the temple, but he put a Roman eagle on it. There are many ways to match the Herod and the Herod line with this sequence of things that this king is going to do as he wills. A lot of people look at this phrase. He won't paying attention to the gods of his fathers or to the one beloved by women. What are we talking about there? It's literally the desire of women. So does that mean he doesn't desire women? Does that mean that women don't desire him? Or does it mean that what women desire, he doesn't pay attention to? And the desire of the woman's seed, talking about Christ, maybe. So maybe this is Herod killing the baby boys. All right, think about it. That works about as well as anything here. He's going to prosper until the indignation is accomplished. And this is another argument for the Herods, because the time of indignation is what's the time? The way I'm reading that is this is the time of God's indignation against Israel, because Israel has removed the legitimate high priests, and they have sold it back and forth, and it's become a political prize, and it's become something you can buy. So that's a time of indignation that God is tolerating with this corrupt priesthood, and that runs from the time of the Maccabees and the time of Antiochus the Great, all the way down until the end of the priesthood. There never was a true high priest that hadn't been bought and sold from the time of the Maccabees all the way down to 70 AD. And so he is going to prosper. This Herod cluster is going to prosper until the indignation is accomplished, until we're finished with the, the abomination that causes desolation, the corruption of the priesthood. Do you think? Does that work? Let's look at verse 40. At the time of the end, the king of the south shall attack him, but the king of the north shall rush upon him like a whirlwind with chariots and horsemen and many ships. He'll come into countries and shall overflow and pass through. He'll come into the glorious land. Tens of thousands shall fall. He'll stretch out his hand against the countries. The land of Egypt shall not escape. He'll become ruler of the treasuries of gold. The Libyans and Cushites will follow. The news from the east and the north shall alarm him. Will go out with great fury to destroy and devote many. He'll pitch his palatial tents between the sea and the glorious holy mountain. Yet he shall come to his end with none to help him. Okay, so does this all, are we still talking about Herod here? This could work, and it works pretty well with looking at the way Herod the Great supported Antony and Cleopatra in the Actian War of 31 BC. Antony and Cleopatra, Egypt, and they kind of wanted local autonomy within the Roman Empire. And the Roman Empire is pretty well, by the middle of the 1st century BC, controlling the Mediterranean world. But it was still a question. It was still a republic. There wasn't an emperor yet, and so Caesar, and so you get you get the balance, the contest for power between the locals and the Uber, the empire. So will local states have quite a bit of autonomy or not? So Antony and Cleopatra wanted more local autonomy in the states of the empire, and then Octavian wanted a much stronger centralized control. So they had a war there, and you can read about it in Shakespeare's Antony and Cleopatra. Herod supported the losing side. He sent supplies and support to Antony and Cleopatra, and lost. But then Herod was very deft politically, and he quickly switched to the winning side. And by the time Antony and Cleopatra are done, the South is effectively over. You don't have North and South fighting anymore. The last pieces of the Greek Empire don't matter anymore. The Seleucids, the Ptolemies are all now under Rome, and the South is effectively over as Rome gains full control over the entire region. So this verses 40 through 45 seem to match up pretty well, at least as best we can tell. We don't have all the details of history we'd like to have, and it will I just kind of believe someday it'll look a whole lot clearer than it does now, because we don't know as much either about history as we should, or may someday. So that's we are then notice that in verse 40 it says we're talking about the time of the end. It's the time of the end. The king of the south is going to attack. The king of the north will rush upon him like a whirlwind. Time of the end identifies this as the end of empire time and the end of Israel time. Remember, we looked at that slide that had the Adamic world and the patriarchal world and the sanctuary world and the empire world, and all those different worlds, all those different eras come to an end. And especially there's some kind of desolation and cut off point, the crisis that it comes to. The time of the end, I think, now identifies this as the end of empire time. And that also makes it the end of Israel time. You don't need the shepherd empires anymore, because Israel is over as a sanctuary people. You don't need any more caretaker empires. The four beasts, or the four parts of Nebuchadnezzar's statue. That's the whole book here. Nebuchadnezzar's statue is in chapter 2. We're still dealing with these four empires. And now in Daniel 11, we finally come to the time of the end, and the south is going to be over, and the north is going to be over. There are no more caretaker empires. Since Israel's role as the priestly sanctuary people among the nations is now finally over. And when Rome finishes its role as caretaker empire. Then Rome destroys Israel. Jerusalem is finished in 70 AD, and that's the time of the end. And then we're in chapter 12. And at that time shall arise Michael, the great prince, who has charge of your people. And there shall be a time of trouble, such as never been seen since there was a nation till that time. But at that time your people shall be delivered, everyone whose name shall be found written in the book. And many of those who sleep in the dust of the earth shall awake, some to everlasting life, some to shame and everlasting contempt. And those who are wise shall shine like the brightness of the sky above, and those who turn many to righteousness like the stars forever and ever. But you, Daniel, shut up the words, seal the book till the time of the end. Many shall run to and fro, knowledge shall increase. Then I, Daniel, looked, and behold, two others stood, one on this bank of the stream, and one on the bank of that, one on that bank of the stream. And someone said to the man clothed in linen, who was above the waters of the stream, how long until the end of these wonders? And I heard the man clothed in linen, who was above the waters of the stream. He raised his right hand and his left hand toward heaven, and swore by him who lives forever that it would be for a time, times, and half a time, and that when the shattering of the power of the holy people comes to an end, these things will be finished. I heard, but I did not understand. We're talking about the end. And if you look at that stuff in verse, I'm leaning towards taking this verse 1, 2, 3 as the time of the incarnation and the associated social and religious turmoil and the storms and the heavenlies and the end of the old creation. Your people will be delivered. Those whose names are found written in the book, and many who sleep in the dust shall awake. This could be this resurrection language could be applied to the national resurrection of Israel as the people come face to face with Messiah. Some rise to life, and others to death. Those who turn and believe, and then this is the place I think that most strongly argues for identifying Michael, the prince of your people, with Christ. You don't have to do this at all, but I just think it's worth thinking about, and it's a possibility that Michael is a word for God the Son. And at that time, and he has a special role as Israel's prince, Israel's king. He's Messiah. And then those things that are listed there in verses 1 and 2 and 3, it sounds like what happens in the incarnation. Jesus comes and does the work that he is to do. So how about that? Then I said, "O my Lord, what shall be the outcome of these things?" And he said, "Go your way, Daniel, for the words are shut up and sealed till the time of the end. Many shall purify themselves, make themselves white, and be refined. But the wicked shall act wickedly. None of the wicked shall understand. But those who are wise shall understand. And from that time that the regular burnt offering is taken away, and the abomination that makes desolate is set up or given, there shall be 1,290 days. Blessed is he who waits and arrives at the 1335 days. But go your way till the end, and you shall rest and shall stand in your allotted place at the end of days. So here's we end with one more puzzle. What's the 1290 and what's the 1335? There are plenty of suggestions about this. Here's one that maybe you haven't heard before. What do you think about this? 1,290 days. Maybe this is the triple 430. 430 years is the bondage of Egypt. So you got 430 years. Exodus 12:40 says that's so the triple bondage, a threefold period of subjection and suffering. God's people are going to suffer under Antiochus. They're going to suffer under the Hasmoneans. They're going to suffer under the Herods. And so you've got this triple bondage time, these 1,290 days, until you get a new Moses, a new Savior who's going to come and deliver. And you're going to get a new Joshua who comes and conquers. Now, Joshua's conquest, by the way, it took 45 years. If you look in Joshua 14:10, this says the time that Joshua did 45 years. So if you add 45 to 1290, guess what? 1335. The numbers come out. Isn't that amazing? It's got to be, doesn't it? Well, listen, if you were, what's it say? If you were wise, you would understand. None of the wicked shall understand, but those who are wise shall understand. So if you're not understanding, you better check yourself, because you might be. Are, you, are we among the wicked if we don't get this? Uh, what we're supposed to be understanding then is that God has promised, and God will work, and God will deliver, and God has this all in control. And Ezra and Nehemiah, don't worry about all the shenanigans and the troubles and the empires in the north and the south and the decades and the centuries that happen while Israel is under the four empires that are supposed to shepherd and protect them. Whew, that's as much as I've got to say about Daniel 10, 11, and 12. I hope that this has been useful. It's challenging. I don't feel like we're completely done with this, but that's enough of that. God bless.